never
How could
thought
you do
my own
this?
daughter
We
Lily
don't want
would
you here
cast me out
anymore.
into the cold Tennessee night, my life packed into 2 suitcases, my heart shattered by her silence. I'm Evelyn Harper, 62, a widow who believed family was my anchor until it wasn't. When my husband died, I gave up everything, moving in with Lily and her husband Derek, hoping for a fresh start. But Derek's cruel words and Lily's averted eyes turned my refuge into a prison. One night, over a tense dinner, they called me a burden and sent me away. Alone, lost, I sat on a curb, wondering how love could turn so bitter. But then, in a dusty motel room, I found my mother's journal, a secret that changed everything. It wasn't just a book, it was a spark, igniting a power I never knew I had. What I did next wasn't revenge, it was justice, quiet and fierce. Want to know how I turned their world upside down? Stick around, because this story isn't just about betrayal, it's about rising from the ashes. Picture a quiet street in Franklin, Tennessee, lined with sprawling oak trees and charming homes, where porch swings sway gently in the evening breeze. That's where I raised Lily, my only child, pouring every ounce of my love into her. Every scraped knee I bandaged, every bedtime story I read, every extra shift I took at the local library to save for her college fund. It was all for her. My husband Tom and I built a life there, a cozy 2-story house filled with laughter and the smell of my homemade pecan pie. But when Tom's heart gave out 2 years ago, the world I knew crumbled. The house felt too big, too quiet, haunted by memories of his voice calling from the garage, his boots by the door. I couldn't stay. Selling it was like tearing out a piece of my soul. But I told myself I still had Lily. She was my reason to keep going, my tether to hope. Lily and her husband Derek lived in a modest apartment complex on the edge of town, a place with peeling paint and creaky stairs, but enough charm to feel like home. At least I thought it could. When Lily offered me a spare room, I clung to the invitation like a lifeline. "Just for a while, Mom," she said, her smile soft but fleeting. Derek barely looked up from his phone, his fingers tapping away as I hauled my suitcases through the door. I told myself he was just busy, that he'd warm up. I was determined not to be a burden. I cooked dinners. Derek's favorite, slow roasted pot roast with carrots and mashed potatoes. I scrubbed their dishes, folded their laundry, even ran errands to the grocery store, picking up Lily's favorite chamomile tea. I kept to my corner of the apartment, a small room with a single window overlooking a cracked parking lot, trying to make myself invisible. But no matter how hard I tried, Derek's irritation was a shadow that followed me. It started with small things: a sigh when I asked if he wanted coffee, a smirk when I left a light on too long. He'd switch the TV channel mid-show, ignoring my quiet protest. Once, as he brushed past me in the narrow hallway, I heard him mutter, "Dead weight." The word stung like a slap, but I convinced myself I'd misheard. I looked to Lily, waiting for her to say something, to defend me like she used to when she was little, when she'd run to me crying after a bad day. But she didn't. "He's just stressed, Mom," she'd whisper, her eyes fixed on her phone. "Work's been tough." I swallowed the hurt, nodding, because that's what mothers do, right? We carry the pain so our children don't have to. But each day, the air in that apartment grew heavier, like a storm waiting to break. The night it all fell apart is burned into my memory. We were at the dinner table, the clink of forks against plates the only sound. I'd spent hours making pot roast, hoping it might soften Derek's edges. Lily scrolled through her phone, barely touching her food. Derek sipped his beer, his jaw tight. The silence was suffocating. Then, out of nowhere, he set his bottle down hard enough to rattle the table. "Evelyn, we can't keep doing this," he said, his voice cold, deliberate. "You're not contributing. We're not a halfway house." My fork froze mid-air. My heart pounded so loud I thought it might burst. I turned to Lily, my eyes pleading for her to say something, to remind him I was her mother, not some stranger leeching off them. She froze, her fingers gripping her phone, her gaze locked on the table. Maybe it's time, Mom, she mumbled, barely audible. For your own place. For everyone's sake. The room spun. I felt the air leave my lungs like I'd been punched. I didn't scream or cry, I just stood, my legs shaking, and walked to my room. I packed 2 suitcases, clothes, a few photos, a locket Tom gave me on our 10th anniversary. That was all I had left of my life. I didn't look at Lily as I walked out. Derek didn't bother to get up. The door clicked shut behind me, and the cold Tennessee night swallowed me whole. I stood on the curb outside their building, the wind biting through my thin coat, my phone dead in my pocket. I sat there for an hour, staring at the stars, wondering what I'd done to deserve this. Lily didn't come after me. No one did. I remember thinking, this is what it feels like to be erased. I checked into the Starlight Inn, a rundown motel with peeling wallpaper and a vending machine that hummed like a dying engine. The room smelled of stale cigarettes and regret. I lay on the lumpy mattress, staring at the ceiling, replaying that night over and over. How could Lily, my little girl who used to beg me to check for monsters under her bed, stand by while her husband threw me out? I sent her a text the next morning. I love you, no reply. I tried again a week later, then again, simple messages, a heart emoji, anything to reach her, nothing. The silence was worse than the rejection. I applied for jobs, cashier at the local Piggly Wiggly, receptionist at a dentist office, but at 62, with grief etched into my face, no one called back. The money from selling the house was dwindling, and the loneliness was a weight I couldn't shake. One evening, desperate for a connection to something familiar, I opened a box I'd brought from the house, a collection of keepsakes, faded photos, and old letters. At the bottom, tucked beneath a stack of birthday cards, was my mother's journal, its leather cover soft and worn. I hadn't touched it in years, hadn't even remembered packing it. Something made me pause, my fingers tracing the edges. I lit the motel's dim lamp and opened it. My mother's neat cursive pulling me back to childhood, to notes she'd slip into my lunchbox. At first it was mundane, weather, church, grocery prices. But then an entry from 1963 stopped my heart. He came again today, said he loved me, but his life is tied to another. Evelyn must never know she's his. I pray she'll forgive me one day. My breath caught. The initials, RTW, appeared again and again, alongside mentions of secret meetings, small payments, and a lawyer named Carter. My mother had carried a secret, and it was about me. Each night in that motel felt heavier than the last. The hum of the vending machine outside my door was a constant reminder of how far I'd fallen. I'd lie awake, staring at the cracked ceiling, replaying the moment Lily looked away while Derek tore me apart. The silence from her phone was louder than any argument, each unanswered text a reminder that I'd lost her. I tried to rebuild, applied for jobs at grocery stores, offices, even a diner off the highway. But at 62, with grief carved into my face, I was either overqualified or not a fit. Polite rejections for being too old, too tired. My savings from the house sale were shrinking, and the loneliness was a fog I couldn't escape. I kept asking myself what I'd done wrong. Had I loved Lily too much? Had I failed to teach her loyalty? The shame was suffocating, but worse was the realization that I'd lost not just my home, but my daughter. But that journal changed everything. I read on, my hands trembling as my mother's words unveiled a truth I'd never imagined. The initials RWW stood for Robert Thomas Warren, a name I vaguely recalled from old Tennessee headlines, a textile magnate with a family, a legacy, and apparently a daughter he never claimed. Me. Clara's entries detailed their affair, her guilt, his promises. A 1964 entry shook me. He promised a trust, something for Evelyn if anything happens to him. It's not official, too risky, but his lawyer, Mr. Carter, knows. I sat back, the journal heavy in my hands. I wasn't just Evelyn Harper, the grieving widow, the discarded mother. I was someone else. Someone tied to a man I'd never known. Someone with a secret my mother had buried to protect me. I didn't sleep that night. I sat on the edge of the motel bed, the journal open, my mind alive with possibility. The next morning, I used the motel's sticky keyed computer to search for Samuel Carter. Hours later, I found him, a retired estate lawyer in Nashville, listed in an outdated directory. I wrote a letter, my hands shaking, pouring out who I was, what I'd found. Please, if you know anything, I need to talk. 2 weeks later, the motel phone rang. Evelyn Harper? A warm, aged voice asked. I've been waiting for you. Samuel Carter knew my mother, not just as a client, but as a friend. I took a Greyhound to Nashville, my suitcase half packed, my heart pounding. In his quiet office lined with old books, he handed me a sealed envelope addressed to my daughter Evelyn Marie. Inside, Robert's confession spilled out. His love for Clara, his shame, his regret. You are my blood, he wrote, and though I was too weak to give you my name, I give you this. Carter slid a folder across the table. Bank accounts, investments, a trust worth over $1 million. It's yours, he said. Always was. I didn't cry. I sat stunned as the truth washed over me. I was seen, chosen, not by the family I'd lost, but by the one I'd never known. That night, in my motel room, I smiled for the first time in months. Lily and Derek thought they'd erased me, but they didn't know the game had changed. I wasn't just a mother with a broken heart. I was Evelyn Marie, heir to a legacy, and I was ready to use it. The journal wasn't just a secret, it was a key, unlocking a power I'd never known I had. With the trust in my hands, I felt a fire reignite inside me. I stayed in Nashville, renting a sleek condo, trading my worn sweaters for tailor blouses, my grief for purpose. I learned about real estate and investments, absorbing the language of power. Then, one evening, I saw an online auction for a rundown apartment building in Franklin. Their building. My heart raced. With Carter's help, I formed Harper Holdings, an anonymous LLC, and bid. When the gavel fell, I owned their world. The roof over their heads, the walls they thought kept me out. A month later, I sent notices. Rents were tripling, market rates enforced. Derek's emails to the property manager were furious, demanding answers. Lily called, her voice shaky. Mom, the rent. It's impossible. Derek's losing it. I let it go to voicemail. This wasn't revenge. It was gravity. They needed to feel the weight of their choices. I upgraded the building, new paint, better lighting, a security system, all funded by their rent. Derek's threats grew sloppy, but Harper Holdings was airtight. No one knew it was me. I drove by one night, seeing their shadows. Derek pacing, Lily slumped. My heart ached, but I drove on. I wasn't begging for their table anymore. I was setting the terms. At the tenant meeting, I stood, calm, and said, I'm Evelyn Harper, and I own this building. Derek's face twisted, shock, then fury. You're behind this. You're ruining us, he shouted. I held his gaze. I gave you a home. I made it better. What I didn't do was forget. Lily's eyes welled up, but she stayed silent. Then she stepped forward, voice shaking. Derek, stop. She's not the enemy. You are. The room froze. Derek stormed out, defeated. After the meeting, Lily lingered, her eyes searching mine, but I wasn't ready. I saw her later at a grocery store, her cart filled with ramen, her face tired. She didn't see me. My heart ached, but I remembered her silence. Her voicemails grew soft. Sorry. One rainy night, she came to my condo, soaked, clutching a bag. Derek's not who I thought, she whispered. We sat with tea, the air heavy. I let him push you away, she said, tears falling. I took her hand. You didn't just let him, Lily. You chose him. She nodded, clutching my mother's journal she'd found. I read it. I didn't know. The weight between us lifted, just a little. Lily left Derek, moved into a studio, and painted again, her canvases alive. I sold the building, funding Clara's Haven, a woman's shelter, and bought a cottage with a porch swing. Lily visited, our silences warm, healing. I forgot how strong you were, she said one evening, swinging beside me. I smiled. You didn't forget. You stopped looking. Derek faded, silenced by shame. I forgave. For me, for Lily. The journal sits on my shelf. A reminder. I was never the burden they made me feel. I was the spark they couldn't extinguish.